I've always loved late night movies. There's something about an almost empty theater that makes the experience feel personal, like the movie's just for you. So when I saw that the midnight screening, some obscure indie horror film, was showing at the old Crescent Theater downtown, I didn't hesitate. Now, the Crescent wasn't exactly new. It had been there since the 70s, tucked between a boarded up pawn shop and an abandoned laundromat. The place had this grimy charm, faded carpet that smelled like stale popcorn and mildew, flickering fluorescent lights, and those old, heavy velvet curtains framing the screen. You know the type of place. The kind where the chairs creak louder than the movie itself. But it was cheap and quiet, so I didn't care. I got there around 11:45 p.m. The lobby was empty, except for this old guy at the ticket booth. His skin looked almost paper thin, like it would tear if you touched it. He didn't say a word, just slid me the ticket with this weird half smile, like he knew something I didn't. But whatever. I brushed it off. I figured he was just tired, or maybe weird. Inside, the theater was nearly empty. Two people sat near the back, both hunched down low, like they were trying to disappear into their seats. I picked a spot right in the middle of row 13. Yeah, I know. Row 13 sounds cliche for a horror story. But I swear I wasn't thinking about that. I just liked the view from there. The previews rolled, then the movie started. But something fell off. The sound was weird, like it was echoing from somewhere deep behind the screen. And the picture, it kept flickering on and off. Not like a glitch, but like the film was struggling to stay on track. I thought maybe the projector was just old. But then about 10 minutes in, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The people behind me, the ones in the back, they weren't moving. I mean, at all. Not shifting in their seats, not breathing, nothing. I tried to shrug it off, but my curiosity got the better of me. I turned around just to take a quick glance. They weren't people. At least, not anymore. Their skin was pale, stretched tight over their bones, their mouths hanging open like they were frozen mid-scream. Their eyes were gone, just dark, hollow sockets staring straight ahead. But the worst part? They weren't facing the screen. They were facing me. I shot out of my seat so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had closed up. I bolted toward the exit, but the door wouldn't budge. It was like it had been welded shut. I pounded on it, but all I heard was the muffled sound of the movie still playing behind me. Then I felt it. A cold breath right against the back of my neck. I spun around, and there, sitting in my seat, was a figure. It was like a shadow had peeled itself off the wall and decided to wear my skin. Its face was mine, but wrong. The eyes were too wide. The smile stretched too far, like it was trying to mimic me, but didn't quite know how. It whispered something. I don't know what, but the voice wasn't human. It sounded like the scraping of metal against metal, like static from an old radio mixed with something else, something alive. I stumbled back, heart pounding, when suddenly the screen went black. The entire theater plunged into darkness. But the whispers didn't stop. They got louder, closer. I don't remember how I got out. One second I was clawing at the door, the next I was outside, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. The street was empty. The theater behind me looked wrong, like it hadn't been open for years. The The neon sign was flickering, letters missing, and the windows were shattered. When I went back the next day, just to prove to myself I wasn't crazy, the Crescent Theater wasn't there. It had burned down 5 years ago. They said it happened during a midnight screening, some electrical fire that killed everyone inside. I never found out what movie they were showing that night, but sometimes when I pass by that empty lot, I swear I can hear it. The whispers calling me back. I don't scare easily. I've been to my fair share of creepy places, abandoned houses, late night drives through empty back roads, you name it. But nothing's ever stuck with me like what happened last summer at the Regal Twin Cinemas. Now, this wasn't some run-down, old-school theater. It was one of those mid-sized places in a strip mall. The kind with sticky floors, overpriced snacks, and that faint smell of burnt popcorn lingering in the air. Nothing fancy, but it was where my friends and I went when we were bored. That night, though, I went alone. My friends bailed last minute, but I'd already bought my ticket for the 10:30 p.m. showing of Silent Hills, this psychological horror film I'd been hyped about for weeks. I figured, whatever, I'll see it solo. When I got there, the place was practically dead. The girl at the concession stand looked half asleep, scrolling through her phone, and the ticket guy barely glanced at me when he ripped my stub. It was a Wednesday night, so I wasn't expecting a crowd, but the emptiness felt weird, like unnervingly quiet. I headed to Theater 6, halfway down this dimly lit hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps, and the buzzing from the overhead lights was the only sound. When I pushed open the theater door, it was almost pitch black. The previews had just started, but the screen was so dim it barely lit up the rows. I picked a seat right in the middle, as usual. As my eyes adjusted, I realized there was only one other person there, a man sitting a few rows ahead, dead center. He was slouched low in his seat, wearing this oversized hoodie with the hood pulled up. I didn't think much of it first. I mean, people go to these movies all the time alone. But something felt off. He wasn't moving, not even a little. No shifting, no fidgeting, nothing. And his head was tilted slightly, like he was listening for something that wasn't there. The more I stared, the more this strange feeling crept up my spine, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. But I brushed it off. I was here to watch a movie, not worry about some random dude in a hoodie. The movie started, and for a while, I was able to lose myself in it. But about 20 minutes in, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The man in front of me had moved. Not in a normal way, though. He hadn't shifted in his seat or gotten up to leave. He was just closer now, like 2 rows closer. I froze. I knew he'd been farther down from when the movie started. I stared at the back of his head, trying to convince myself I was just imagining it. That maybe I just misremembered where he was sitting. But as I sat there, he moved again. I didn't see him stand up. I didn't hear his footsteps. When I blinked, he was now just 1 row in front of me. That's when I realized he wasn't watching the movie. His head was tilted back just slightly, like he was listening to me. I felt this wave of cold run through my entire body. Every instinct screamed at me to get up and leave, but I was frozen in place, staring at the back of this man's hoodie. Then, without warning, his head snapped around fast, like he knew I was watching him. There was no face, just darkness, like his hood was a void, swallowing any light that touched it. And then he stood up. I bolted. I didn't care about looking cool or making a scene. I practically tripped over the seat, sprinting toward the exit. As I shoved the door open, I looked back one last time. The theater was empty. No man, no one. I ran straight into the lobby, trying to catch my breath. I told the ticket guy, this teenager who looked like he couldn't care less, that someone was messing around with me in Theater 6. But when he went to check, he came back shrugging his shoulders. There's no one in there. You're the only one who bought a ticket for that show. I left without saying a word. But here's the thing. That wasn't the end of my story. A few days later, I was scrolling through local news online, and something made my blood run cold. There was an article about a man who'd gone missing the week before. The photo showed a blurry security cam still of him walking into the exact same theater I was in. Theater 6. Same night, same time. The cops said he never came out. They never found him. And now every time I pass that theater, I can't shake the feeling that he's still in there, sitting in the dark, waiting for someone else to sit alone. I've got a rule when I go to the movies. Phone off, no exceptions. But not everyone follows that. And trust me, after what I saw, you'll never leave your phone on in a movie theater ever again. This happened about a year ago. I was at this small, independently owned theater just outside town. You know the type. Cheap tickets, old seats with broken armrests, and a faint smell of cleaning supplies that never quite covered the mildew. But I liked it. It had character, and the place was usually quiet, especially for late night shows. That night, I went to see a thriller, The Last Caller, I think it was called. The irony still gets to me. The theater was about half full, mostly couples, a few loners like me scattered around. I picked a spot near the aisle, just in case I wanted to sneak out early. The lights dimmed, the previews rolled, and everything felt normal. Until about 30 minutes into the movie. Someone's phone started ringing. It was annoying at first, loud too. One of those shrill, old-school ringtones that no one uses anymore. It echoed through the theater, cutting right through the tension on screen. People started groaning, whispering for the person to pick it up or shut it off. But here's the thing. It kept ringing. Way too long for a normal call. Finally, I saw a guy, maybe mid-30s, scruffy beard, baseball cap pulled low, dig into his pocket and pull out his phone. He looked confused, like he didn't recognize the number. But instead of turning it off, he answered it. This is where things started to get weird. At first, I thought he was just whispering back and forth, trying not to disturb anyone. But after a few seconds, people started noticing how still he was. He wasn't moving, not blinking. His phone was just pressed against his ear, and he was frozen. The movie kept playing, but everyone's attention was now on this man. The tension in the room was thicker than whatever was happening on screen. Then he stood up. Slow, like his body was on autopilot, still holding the phone to his ear. He started walking down the aisle toward the exit, but the way he moved, I can't explain it. It wasn't natural. His steps were stiff, like he was being pulled along by invisible strings. And just before he reached the door, he stopped. His whole body went rigid, and then, without warning, he slammed the phone against the wall, a hard thud that echoed throughout the theater, and I swear for a second, the movie audio even cut out. Everyone was dead silent. The guy just stood there, breathing heavy, his back to us. Then he slowly turned around, and I'll never forget what I saw. His eyes were wide, way too wide, like he'd just seen something that shattered his mind. And his mouth stretched into this unnatural grin, like his skin was being pulled too tight over his skull. He just stood there, staring at all of us, like he was trying to figure out who to go after next. Someone in the back finally shouted out, "Hey, you okay?" But he didn't respond. Instead, he dropped the phone, and the moment it hit the floor, the ringing started again. But it wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from all around us, from other people's pockets. I felt my own phone vibrating against my leg, and this cold wave of dread washed over me. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my phone. Unknown number. Same shrill ringtone. Everyone in the theater now was checking their phones, and the same look of confusion and fear spread across everyone's face. But the guy, the one who answered first, he wasn't confused anymore. He was laughing. This low, broken laugh, like his throat wasn't used to making the sound. Then he bolted straight out of the theater, the door slamming behind him. No one followed. The theater manager called the cops, but by the time they arrived, the guy was already gone. Vanished like he'd never been there. And here's the kicker. The police traced the number that had called him. It was registered to a woman who had been missing for over 5 years. Her last known location? This exact same movie theater. They never found the guy. And the rest of us, we all got the same call again the next night. Same ringtone, same unknown number. I don't go to late night movies anymore. And I never answer unknown calls.